Hey everyone, we're back here at the Whirling Circles Internal Martial Arts Podcast. I'm Sean Garcia, joined by Frank Allen. Excited to be back for our fourth episode. We're hitting the 1 month anniversary here, and so we appreciate all the support so far, all the subscribers on YouTube, all the reviews that are coming in on iTunes. Definitely keep those coming. Those help with us getting found and us getting this content out to more people. And if you're trying to figure out how to, subscribe on the iTunes, not on the iTunes, on other services, we are also on Spotify. We're on SoundCloud now. We're on Stitcher. Basically anywhere where you can find podcast streaming, we're on those services now. Google and Amazon podcasting, we're on all those places now. So keep spreading the word, and we're excited to keep bringing this content to y'all. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been going into some introductions on what the internal martial arts are. We've done a show on Bagwajan and then on Tai Chi Chuan, and now we are doing one on Xing Yi. And this is, we talked about last week, Frank, how this one is a little bit, probably one of the ones that are more or less known about, not only the history, but, there's very few practitioners, or at least people who are like clearly Xing Yi practitioners. So before we get into it, how you feeling?
I'm fine.
Yeah,
How are you?
I'm doing good. I got this at the farmer's market, we got this Bloody Mary mix, but I don't drink. I think Bloody Marys are like vodka or something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't
Vodka
drink
and
vodka.
tomato juice.
Yeah, I don't drink vodka, but my wife got it, and it's a good mix. So I put in some like a just a, it's still middle of the day, so I just got like a little half a shot of tequila in there, and I heard they call it a Bloody Maria, but that sounds like someone had an
Yeah,
accent.
that yeah, that does. I wouldn't go for that. Um if you ever go into Mongolia with John, you got to learn how to drink vodka though. That's when I
Oh my
decided I
god,
couldn't make the trip. I wanted to go with him and see the wrestling till I found out about the vodka drinking. And I'm like, nah,
the
I
eight
can't
ounce
hang with
shot
that.
glasses. You think it's a cup? No, that's the shot.
No, it's a water glass.
Oh my
And
gosh.
as I understand it, you sit around the yurt and you have a water glass and they fill it up and they hand it to one guy and he downs it and then he hands it back and they fill up the same glass again and hand it to the next guy and it goes around
You can't
and
slow
keeps
down
going
the
around.
circle. Can't slow down the circle. Mongolia. I'm looking forward. I actually started following. You probably know this guy. This really cool wrestler from New York City, young black kid who he's moved out to Mongolia. I think traditionally he's a Chinese wrestler, like his base, and now he's out in Mongolia and learning different
Shrijo.
system. Yeah, and now he's out in Mongolia learning their different styles and stuff like that. But his stuff is really great.
Shrijo was considered to have two basic styles and one was Mongolian wrestling, the Chinese version of
Mm.
Mongolian wrestling, and the other one was what they called fast wrestling. And Chen Tinghua, the great Bagua master, was a Shuaijiao champion of Beijing when he started studying Bagua, and he was of the fast wrestling style. And I don't know that much about it, but as I understand it, the Mongolian wrestling is you use the grips, you move around, you move around, you move around. Fast wrestling is the minute you touch them, you try to throw them.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think you're not trying to get to the ground. It's not like a jujitsu kind of grapple where you're actually just trying to toss them, more like a judo, toss them out.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll see if we could do more on that later on in a future episode. Um, but yeah, so this episode though, we're talking about Xing Yi. So why do you think it's the less known of the three? Is it the youngest? Is it the one that
No, it's
is it?
absolutely not the youngest. Bagua's the youngest.
Mm, so how that
Bagua's the
happen?
youngest by far. It just didn't happen to come here. It's actually, I think, in China, at least in their heydays, was as well known as any of them.
Mm,
There was, in fact, in the mid late 1800s, it was pretty much they stayed out of each other's way. By everybody did a little bit of everything, but primarily the Taiji people were the imperial guards. The Bagua people did more bodyguard work, and the Xing Yi people did more cargo guard, security guard work.
Mm.
Now, of course, they all might do any of it. Like Yin Fu's security guard service, I'm sure, covered all aspects of guarding, but primarily they were noted for those specialities.
Wow. And so, in terms of its getting to the states, is there not as much Xingyi practitioners? I feel like Tai Chi is probably the bigger of the three, of course, and then maybe more Bagua. I see more Bagua, and then Xingyi maybe coming in on third there in terms of practitioners in the U.S.
Well, there's a lot of people that do Bagua and Xing Yi. There's a big tradition of doing Bagua and Xing Yi that came down the 1800s from three guys in particular. We'll get into that when we start the lineage. But there's a lot of it comes down through schools that do both.
Hmm.
But also, Xing Yi is the internal hard style. It uses internal powering, but it's force on force. My force meets your force head on and overcomes it. So a lot of people don't get it. It's not a soft art.
Right.
So it looks different. And I think more people decide that why do Xing Yi if I'm already doing Shaolin? I'm already doing karate. I'm already doing a hard art. So
Hmm.
there's probably that.
Hmm. Maybe we can answer that question later on in this show. So yeah, so let's get into a little bit of the history. Where'd Xingyi come from?
Well, Xing Yi was founded by a guy named Jilong Feng, who in the late 1700s was a military man who retired to his home to what was then the very small fishing oriented city of Shanghai. Shanghai didn't get big until they turned it into a opening of the foreign businessman port.
Mm-hmm.
And, about 75, 50 years later. And so he retired and he decided to work on his own martial art. So what he did was he took the standard spear footwork and put five element strikes on it. And that's why the footwork from Xingyi you can see show up all over the place in different styles, is because it's actually old spear footwork. It's used a
Mm.
lot in various places. The half step, the flying step, the zigzag step, the chicken step. They're standard martial arts footwork. And then he had a technique for each of the five elements. And he may have started some of the animals also, but the basic idea was that you could fight with these five techniques or variations thereof. And then he taught his houseboy, Master Li, who died fairly young, but Master Li took it to Henan and created the relatively to this day quite rare Hunan Xingyi style. Uh, it's worth mentioning though because one of his top students was also Ma San Yuan, who was this fighter who killed 50 men. And then they say he was paranoid because he thought that their relatives were going to try and kill him. But are you paranoid if they really are trying to kill you?
Right.
Which,
You kill 50 people.
which,
You got a target on your back.
and he was famous for doing the horizontal dragon leaping. It's the only person I've seen that taught that, and it's a thing that BP Chan did and was good at. And it's you're just a little bit off the floor and you fly forward horizontally.
Mm.
And they said that this ma could do 15 feet in one leap. I would have thought that was weird if I hadn't seen BP Chan, who's a little tiny guy, do like 6 feet.
Wow.
No problem. So I have no problem believing this guy could do 15 feet if it was his specialty.
Right.
And so one day he's in a tea house and he thinks he sees some of these guys coming to get him. And he gets paranoid and he jumps up and he does his great 15-foot leap, misjudges, bangs his head into the corner of one of the tea house tables, fractures his skull, and dies. And as the
Wow.
legend goes, there wasn't actually anyone after him that day. That
Wow.
day, it was just
It was just
paranoia.
paranoia. Oh man.
So I like that story. And he also taught someone named Zhang Qicheng, who was the guy who carried on the Hunan, the reason that we still have it. because with those two Ma's dying young, it would have just disappeared. But this other guy carried it on.
Mm.
But I don't know anything else about it. It's not even vaguely popular anywhere, even in China, as far as I know. I just know that it does exist. And then Ji Lung Feng also taught Sai Chi Wu, who's Sai Chi Wu was a military man who actually became the commanding general of Shaanxi province after studying in Shanghai with Ji Lung Feng. And he created the Shaanxi style. And that was one of the base styles that's still around to some extent. And then the next people that appear are the Tai brothers, Tai Lingpan and Tai Lungpan. And legend looks like they learned directly from Sao, but I don't think so because of the dates. It seems
Mm.
there's some teachers between there, but they're the next people that appear. And they were these really, rich kids, did martial arts because they liked it, didn't have to do much of anything else. And they had this older student who's late 30s, 40 by the time he got noticed, study with them, and they thought, well, this guy's older. What can he do? And they taught him to stand in Santi stance, and they taught him the splitting fist, and in place and in line drills, and that was it. That's all they taught him. But he was really good at those two things, really good. So at one point, their mother is having a birthday party, and we'll have the old guy demonstrate his stuff. He's pretty good at those two things. And he does, and their mother realizes he's good and likes the older guy. He's an older guy. And she starts in the middle of the party, in the middle of the group, chiding them on why you only teaching this guy this much. He's the best student that you've got. None of your other students are this good. And you only taught him these two things? What is wrong with you two? And, getting told off by mom in the middle of a bunch of people. So they proceed to teach him everything they know as quickly as possible and send him on his way. And he's
Mom's
good. He
crush.
absorbs, yes,
Nice.
and he absorbs it all and goes home to Hubei province and starts teaching his Shansei style. And his number one student in that is Jui Chai, Shansei style. But then he starts adapting and adding, and he becomes the great creator of Xing Yi. He creates the rest of the animal
Mm.
forms. He creates the linking forms, and it becomes known as Hubei Xing Yi. And most of the Xing Yi in the world today is Li Rengnan's Hubei Xing Yi.
Mm.
Now, going back to this ancient patriarch thing, of course, Ji Lung Feng couldn't say that he invented it because you just couldn't do that. It had to be old and tested. So he just used the old dodge of, oh, I learned it from a Taoist in the mountains. And
Of course.
by the
Those
third
Taoists in the mountains,
generation,
man, they're skilled martial artists.
well, by the third generation, his people decided that story was getting a little weak. They needed another one. So then they came up with General Yue, came from Yue, and he was a very famous general. I mean, China loves nothing like they love a tragic story, and that was Yue. Yue was a general in the Sung dynasty who was off on the northwest fighting the Jurchen, who eventually took northern China and created the Qin dynasty. I mean, the whole thing of people coming off the steppes and northerners coming and creating dynasties really started with them,
Mm.
not the Mongols. And he was the only general that was beating them. And so the emperor noticed it and was going to give him these accolades. And there was a minister and his wife, theoretically the pushy Mrs. Macbeth type wife, who didn't want this to happen. So they put a bug in the emperor's ear that this guy is building up his military so much because he wants to come in and bring in his army and take over and become the new emperor. And the emperor believes him. So he calls Yue in, and Yue then don't bring your troops, just come by yourself. And he comes in thinking he's going to get these riches and accolades and promoted and whatnot. He shows up, they tell him he's a traitor and cut his head off. Then they strike him from the records, and for 80 years he's like non-existent until somebody uncovers a letter written by the wife explaining the whole thing that they did. And 80 years after they're all dead, it all comes out, and Yuefei becomes this famous tragic hero, tremendous tragic hero. In fact, I'd like to find a place somewhere in China. There's these statues of Yuefei standing above the minister and his wife who are
Mm.
kneeling, and they claim it's the original carving of Yuefei, but that everybody comes and spits on the minister and his wife, and it's been going on for so many hundreds of years that
Wow.
their faces disappear and they have to recarve them because of the
Because
spit.
of all the spit.
Yeah. Um, so Yufei is a great person to grab onto for your
Mm.
ancient patriarchs. And were you to believe these ancient patriarch stories, he's the founder of Xing Yi. Well, the story is that he created the 8 pieces of brocade Qigong set.
Mm.
One of the oldest Qigong sets. The reality is no one knows where it came from. The 8 pieces of Qigong, 8 pieces of brocade Qigong set for everyone. Then he created the entire Eagle Claw system for his enlisted men, and he created the Xing Yi system for his officers. And of course, he
Mm.
didn't do any of
Mm.
that. Just people had latched onto him to be
Right.
their ancient patriarch. He did apparently come up with one of the first guys to train his whole army, his officers and his enlisted men in martial arts instead of just training the officers. And he
Very
also
cool.
invented taking the elbow knives, which appear later as a bagua weapon, but taking the elbow knives for the infantry versus the cavalry, because the Jurchen were horsemen off the steps, and the infantrymen would roll under the horse's belly and slice their belly as they rolled by.
Oof,
And he
brutal.
invented that technique, but he did not create Xing Eagle
Mm.
Claw, or 8 pieces of brocade. But to this day, you find, I mean, one of my students came in with this documentary on Xing Yi and told Jonathan and I we should watch it. Apparently, Jonathan watched a bunch of it. I mean, I watched the initial 5 elements and said, no, this is horrible. I'm not going to watch this.
Oh, it's circulating on
And
YouTube right now, right? It's a pretty well produced, like visually good music and all that kind of stuff, and it's coming up in a lot of searches of Shingi.
I
And
just
John
watched the
told
five
me,
elements.
yeah. For those who don't know, John's one of the of Frank's senior students and a good friend of mine's, and yeah, he just said that it was just like all the bull.
Well, for one thing, they go on how Yu Fair was the founder of Xing Yi. They buy into that story.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, so Li Ningran proceeded to teach tons of people. For one thing, he taught Liu Lan, who became the great teacher of the next generation. And Liu Lan taught the first 3 guys to go and become the Xingyi and Bagua masters. Zhang
I see.
Jiaotung, Li Suni, and Liu Quan were all Xingyi students of Liu Lan. And a lot of the Bagua that comes down from those 3.
Mm.
And then Li Rengnan also taught Guo Yun Shun, the divine crushing fist, the most famous fighter, and in a lot of ways the most famous person in the Xingyi system.
Mm.
The Guo story is very famous, very well known, pretty interesting story. He was his teacher's #1 fighting student, and he was working as a bounty hunter. And the bounty hunter rules were you could bring them in any shape you wanted as long as they were alive.
Mm-hmm.
But if you killed them, it was considered murder, and they'd execute you. And at one point, in a very classic, as the story goes, this really badass bandit is beating up these security guards and about to steal their stuff when over the mountain comes a cavalry in the form of Guo Yun Shun. And he comes down, faces the guy, decks him, talking to the other security guards. When the guy revives, it jumps up and attacks him from behind. And he turns around quickly and opens up and kills the guy by mistake. Whoops. So then at the trial, the security guard and the security guards who were there, and the owner of the company and whatnot, going, he saved our guys' lives. This guy was going to kill my guys, and he saved my guys' lives, and you really shouldn't execute him, and shouldn't. He really is a hero. And so they said, okay. And instead of executing him, they gave him 3 years of hard labor
Mm.
in ball and chain setup. And for his 3 years, he practiced his splitting fist with a shortened step because of the chains,
Ball and chain. Oh wow.
and with this shortened step, and created the Guoyin Shun half steps, crushing, excuse me, not splitting, crushing fist, and created the Guoyin Shun half step crushing, and got really, really strong at it, dragging the stuff around,
Yeah.
short stepping,
Let's talk about being rooted.
and then he gets out, and of course all of his contacts are gone. There's nothing there, so he goes to the guard company and says, I did save you guys, and you know that, so you owe me.
Mm.
And they're like, okay, yeah, we owe you. And they gave me X amount of money. Well, that was fine until a couple weeks later, he's back and goes, you owe me. And they give him some more money. A couple weeks later, he's back and goes, you still owe me. And after a month or two of this, the the head of the company goes to Li Regnan, his teacher, and goes, look, your guy did save my people, and we are thankful. But if he keeps this up, he's going to bankrupt us. We just can't afford to keep paying this guy every time he shows up looking for more
Right.
money. So Lee calls Guo in and goes, you're getting too big ahead. You can't be out there. You're giving us a bad name. And you're not that great anyway. You never even quite finished your training. While your senior brother, Yi Chai, the guy that did the Shansei before he did the Hubei,
Right.
is better than you anyway. And Guo's like, well, that can't be. And legend has it he walked out of his teacher's school and with no breaks or anything walked many miles to Yi Chai's house and walks in and says, we got to fight. And Yi Chai's like, little brother, you just walked a long ways. You want some tea? You want some baijiu? You want to calm down? No, we got to fight right now. Right now? Yeah, let's go in the garden and fight. Okay. And then there's a couple stories of how this fight went. Undoubtedly, Guo attacked with his famous half step crushing.
Right.
And one story is that Yi Chai just did the standard um, answer to crushing, which is splitting,
Mm.
and then pulled his hand, like a fraction of an inch away from Guo's head, and they knew he could have crushed it. Or the other one is because Guo was ready for that he stepped in with a swallow, which is a groin strike, and stopped just before he crushed those. But one of them, either way, Guo knew he'd lost. I was like,
Mm.
oh, and had some tea, and then went back to Li Regnan and finished his studies, and cooled out, and became a great master who, at the time that Dung Hai Chuan was teaching in the emperor's nephew's house,
Mm.
and Yang Lu Chan was teaching the imperial guard, Wo Yun Shen was teaching in one of the duke's houses in the Forbidden City. And that's kind of why we know these three arts, because these three guys were in the Forbidden City towards the end of the last dynasty.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And that's kind of how these three arts got famous and why we know about them, because of Dung Hai Chuan, Yang Lu Chan, and Guo Yun Shen. Yi Chai, on the other hand, is a story that there's a couple of stories I like. One is I heard they used to do the chicken step when he was a cargo guard and go out in front of the horses and go out and scout stuff out and bring it around. And I thought, wow, that's really fast. So one day it dawned on me, oh, wait, we're talking about old draft horses pulling heavy wagons. It
Yeah.
wasn't like he had to be that fast to go out in front of them and bring it back. Well, there's another story, though, of him hearing of a Japanese swordsman who had set up a platform on the coast and was challenging Chinese martial artists and had killed a number of the Chinese martial artists. And Yi Chai, well, this can't happen. So he takes his sword, heads for the town, walks a long ways, another long walk straight to the platform. Says okay, gets up when he's next, and the Japanese guy attacks him, and he steps behind. He does a zigzag step, and suddenly he's behind the Japanese guy, and then he just steps back. So the Japanese guy attacks him again, and he does it a second time, and this time he's got his sword touching the guy's kidney, and he's
Mm.
got the guy on the edge of the stage. and he could have run him through the kidney. He could have kicked him off the stage. Instead, he did the worst thing he could possibly do to that guy. He just stepped back and laughed at him. And theoretically, the guy was never seen again. Probably went home,
Disgraced.
did the yeah, did the how to carry thing, but should have. But yeah, that was Juri Chai. He was quite a guy himself. And meanwhile, Liu Lan is teaching Zhang Jiao Tung, Li Suni, Wang Jin, Gao Yisheng. No, Li Suni taught Gao Yisheng. Excuse me. Zhenrong Zhao, who I mentioned, the Zhenrong Zhao Bagua School, but he also did Xing Yi. I mean, Liu Lan taught a lot of people. And Zhang Jiao Tung, Li Suni, and Liu Quan, who also studied with him, moved from Shen County. Now they're up in Shen County, which is a very famous martial arts area. I think I may have mentioned before a little bit north and west of Beijing, which was the end of the Silk Road, which had winding roads going through mountains. So it was a perfect place to attack the caravans going in and coming out. And so there was almost like a technique war that went on in Shen County. The cargo guards would develop new techniques to defend themselves, so the
Mm.
bandits would develop new techniques to beat them, and it's kind of like the weapons war of Russia and America in the Cold War, but it was a technique war, and it made the techniques of Shen County really really strong area. And I mean Shen County. Liu Lan was from Shen County. Chen Tinghua, the Bagua master, was from Shen County. Liu Quan was from Shen County. Guoyuan Shen, Gao Yisheng, Chang Chao Tung, Li Suni, they're all Shen County guys.
But it
And
makes
so
sense
these,
that this material reality, right? Like this kind of technique war. I mean, there's no better motivators. I mean, like we see like space exploration almost is doesn't happen anymore because there's no Cold War and there's no battle of the US versus the Soviets and all this kind of stuff. It really is like when you think about formations of new techniques, new art forms and all this kind of stuff, there has to be some material kind of motivation for it and street battles, technique wars that kind of leads to all that, those kind of quick evolutions and the demand to make it better and surpass this other one.
yeah, and that's what went on in Shen County with techniques.
Mm.
And then these guys come and they learn, they all study with Chen Tinghua because they probably knew him from all being from Shen County, which he
Mm.
was also. And so they became the first connection of the Xing and Bagua people that did both. And Liu Quan was actually the first guy. After he'd done that, he went and studied with Yang Luchan. So he was one of the first guys to do all three.
So
And in
what
fact,
so outside of just like the connection with different personages, is there some benefits in your mind on bringing Bagua and Xing Yi together?
yeah, Bagua's got a lot of horizontal circles or horizontal circles circling into vertical circles and a lot of going around. Whereas Xingyi's got a lot, it's got its zigzag step, which is kind of the angle of Bagua, but most of it is a vertical circle, which makes little circles that cut the angle in little tiny things that almost look like straight lines. It's noted as a straight line gung fu, but it's not. It's got
Right.
those little teeny tiny angles in it. But they fit together really well because of the different angles that they take and the techniques are complementary to each other. And they've fit together from the beginning. That's why the Xingyi people would study Bagua whenever they got a chance. And Liu Quan, who did all three, actually ended up connecting. Became good friends with the Chung family. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, when Deng Hai Chuan retired from the palace, he split uh, Beijing into four schools in each corner of the city, and the northern school belonged to Liu Quan, and the
Mm-hmm.
southern school had been his was Chen Tinghua's. And when Chen Tinghua went and got himself killed in the Boxer Rebellion,
Right.
and his son took over. His son was a great guy, and his son did Bagua and Tai Chi. So his uncle Liu knew him from studying Tai Chi together and from being friends with his father and whatnot. And he came down and helped him run the school because the younger Cheng, although he was a really nice guy, was also an opium addict, so didn't help business much. And so Uncle Liu came down and helped him run it. And Liu was the guy that had developed this um, 64 hands, Liu de Quan, 8 lines, 8 techniques in each, a way of teaching the military. And it had all of his stuff. He'd been a young Shaolin master before he did the Xing Yi. So these 64 hands have Northern Shaolin, Xing Yi, Bagua, and Tai Chi techniques all mixed in together. And although it's this great mix, it only comes down through the Chung style school.
Mm.
And so it comes down through Bagua, although it's a mix of all the Northern school techniques. And luckily for us, it's one of Liu Jingru's favorites. So that's something else that we have to pass on also is the 64 hands of Liu de Quan. And stuff continued on. Li Sun taught Zheng Feng, who was one of the guys that went to Taiwan in '49, and he'd been a um, student, senior student, never taught because he was a businessman. But he got to Taiwan and tried to run a flour and rice business and wasn't ready for the Taiwan weather. And all of a sudden, his stuff molded and he was broke.
Mm-hmm.
So he became a professional teacher. And he taught the Hung brothers, including Hung Yi Shang, and Hung Yi Shang taught a whole bunch of Americans, including he was one of Bruce Francis's teachers. So some little bit of the Xing Yi that I got came down from that school. And um, you also had Li Sun taught Howen Guang. Howen Guang taught um, Lo Jing Wu. Lo Jing Wu was Liu Jingru's Bagua and Xing Yi teacher.
Ah.
So most of the Xing Yi that I teach now comes down from the Li Sun school by way of Howen Guang and Lo Jing Wu. So that's there also. And Guoyan Shun didn't teach that much, but he taught Sun Ludang, who was one of the most famous martial artists. We mentioned him when his son style Tai Chi in the last episode. And he taught Wang Chai, who was the founder of the Yi Quan system, Da Cheng Chuan and Yi Quan being the standing postures for energy, and with techniques that came off of them that were like Xing Yi techniques. And Sun Ludang, of course, was a famous 3 style guy who started out with Xing Yi and then got introduced to Chen Tinghua. And he was so good that when he met Chen Tinghua, when Guo Yinshun took him to Chung said, "Your skills are so high that if you can't learn everything I have to teach in 3 years, you're wasting both our times."
Mm.
And he absorbed the whole Chung style in 3 years. But it was like it wasn't like they blew it up fast at first. He was only doing the single palm and developing the energy of the single palm. It's supposed to have this explosive energy in his single palm. And they said when he was on his own, he went out. He knew there were these old, like 600-pound cannons that were discarded, and he practiced hitting them and trying to get them to move in the pile. And Chen Tinghua didn't know he was doing this. And at one point, this southerner shows up to challenge the Chen Tinghua school. And so he fights a couple of Chung's senior guys and beats him. And Chen Tinghua's like, well, I guess I got to fight this guy myself. And Sun Ludang's like, let me fight him first, teacher. If he beats me, then you fight him. He says, well, you got to do Bagua. You can't do your Xing Yi. And I've only taught you that one technique. He says, it's okay. Let me try. Says, yeah, what the hell? You know? So he fights and he lands his single pounding palm on the southerner and knocks him right out a window. He was flying across the room and out a window. And I love the story was that Chen Tinghua was so happy that he jumps up, yells, and slaps the bench that he was sitting on and breaks that in half with his palm. Um, but Sun Ludang was also that after the 3 years, Chen Tinghua told him, if you want to learn more of
Mm.
what this is about, go study with the Taoists in the Southwest. And at one point he did. And a lot of the Taoist Bagua connections were known and taught a little bit by Dong Hai Chuan, but no one ever really made anything formal of it till Sun Ludang. And he's the one that did all the writings that connected the two of them.
Mm.
He's the one that made strong connections between the I Ching and the I Ching system that Dong Hai Chuan was. He's the one that brought the Nine Palace system into Bagua. He's the one that developed the Bagua um, Taoist connection. But he was also this great fighter, like a little guy, 5'7", 140 pounds, and he was noted for winning matches. And at one point, he's on the coast. I'm not sure if it was Tianjin or Shanghai, but he's in one of those towns when this giant Russian shows up and goes to the city officials and says, "I'm here to show you that Chinese martial arts is terrible. Bring anybody you want to fight." And so they call in Sun Ludang to sign a contract to fight the guy. This is giant Russian. Sun Ludang, like I said, 5'7", 140 pounds. And as having been smaller in my youth, I can relate to small fighter guys. And I know exactly what the thought pattern was. It's like, I don't want this guy on a big platform where he can move around and use all his size.
Right.
So they're supposed to be signing the contract, and Sun Ludang gets in his face, gets the guy to go for him so he can get his energy, twists his energy around and slams him through a glass mahogany cabinet. Totally messes the guy up. He's all cut and smashed up and whatnot. And today, if you attacked the guy at the contract signing and smashed him through a glass mahogany cabinet, you'd be going straight to jail. But that was
Mm-hmm.
China in the early 1900s. No, the next day they had a huge ceremony and gave him a brass plaque as the savior of Chinese culture and honor. And it's like, that was Sun Ludang, who later
Awesome.
met up with Hao and created his Tai Chi system, which we mentioned last time.
Yeah. So, so you have the five punches, and then you have the animals. There's like is there like 12, or is it sometimes like 13 or 14 animals?
Well, there's standardly it's a 12 animal system, but it seems to be pretty arbitrary. Some people do all 12. Some people don't do all 12. Some people do just the short one move versions of the 12. Some people do long versions of the 12. Some people break up the long versions and call the number of different ones of the same animals. A guy
Mm.
we studied with a little bit when we were first there claimed to have 20 variations of the horse. And
Mm.
then some people, I'm not sure what, add other animals up to 18 or 20 animals. So it's pretty arbitrary, the animals. The system is based on the five elements. And then you have, your basic 12 animals.
Mm. And when people think of animals, it usually thinking like maybe like a northern Shaolin or Shaolin systems. Not so much of the, so how does it differ, the Xing Yi versus the animal systems from maybe like Shaolin's northern Shaolin?
Well, of course, they're mostly off of the Xing Yi footwork, and they're their own variants of stuff. Monkey looks kind of like anybody's monkey, actually, but most of the stuff looks quite different from other people's stuff. It's like most of the tigers in the Shaolin systems are this kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and the Xing Yi tiger actually pounces like a
Mm.
tiger would. And the horse systems are really weird because a lot of them have nothing to do with this. One move that's definitely the horse,
Mm.
but a lot of the rest of them have to do with stuff you would do with the reins,
Ah,
like
yes.
wrapping the reins around your wrist, but they come within the horse techniques. Um,
I've seen you demonstrate some of the bear stuff. That's pretty cool.
yeah, well, of course I like the bear. It fits my physique these days. In the old days, it was a snake, but for the last 15 years or so, it's more of a bear. And yeah, I like the bear. The bear is pretty strange. Um, and you tend to, I mean, pick out the ones that you really like and specialize in them.
Yes.
Like I said, some people want to do as much as they can, but most of you find the ones that fit your body style and fit your movement style. fit your attitude and specialize in them.
So the question you said earlier is something I think I wanted to kind of pick your brain about, because you talked about how Xing Yi out of the different internals is more of the young and a lot of the hard style. Um, but people are like, they question, why would I do that if I have a base in some other hard style? What would be the benefit of learning Xing Yi, right? Like if someone is like a Northern Shaolin practitioner, why would they want to learn Xing Yi? So what do you think really is distinct about Xing Yi, and why is it such a amazing standalone martial art?
Well, it's incredibly powerful and it's got a lot of forward movement. I mean, one of the adages of the Xing Yi system is the Xing Yi boxer never backs up, but there are
Mm.
step back steps. So I would say a Xing Yi boxer never backs up even when he does, because when you step back, you're always striking forward as you step back. So, and there's very, very few steps back. Mostly it's about going right through your person. And it's very, very powerful methods of doing that. Um, One of my guys who's been at it a long time describes Xing Yi as, he says, if my opponent is the biggest, nastiest, most rabid, vicious pit bull you ever saw running down the road at me, I'm the 16-wheel trailer truck about to run that dog over. Um, so it's very, very powerful. And it's, once you get the general idea, it's not that tricky to generate the power. You have to really do it. You have to really focus. I mean, it's mind intent. I mean, the name of the stuff, Xing Yi, it's form, mind intent.
Mm.
Xing form, E mind intent. That's the name of the stuff. In other words, form, martial postures, driven by mind intent, willpower. I mean, that's the name of the thing. Martial postures driven by willpower. And when you get that idea down, it develops power pretty quickly and pretty drastically. And it mixes with other stuff nicely, like all the people doing Bagua with it in the 1928 All China tournament when they were starting to develop tournaments to open up all of the national and provincial and city martial arts academies in an attempt to improve the health of the Chinese people due to all the opium problems that had been brought about by the opium wars. And in that tournament, in the fighting, they fought from a whole couple hundred guys down to the last 10. And then they decided they weren't going to let the last 10 guys fight each other because they were definitely going to kill each other. They're all that good. So instead, they had them vote among the 10 of them who they thought the champion should be. But what I found interesting, in the 10 guys that came down from that, three of them were brothers.
Mm.
And the three brothers studied a combination of Xing Yi Quan, Northern Shaolin, and Western boxing. And three brothers ended up being three of the 10. And that was what they did for styles. I mean, it's
Wow.
it's a pretty amazing style, and it's actually, if it clicks, it's much easier to learn than a lot of styles. Much easier to learn.
Why
Of
is
course,
that?
it's not. It's just simple ideology and not that many techniques. But of course, if you're looking to be fancy, it's not it. One of the other basic old adages of Xing Yi, which I like, is it's not very pretty. It just works. That's, I wish I knew it in Mandarin because it's one of these standard statements about Xing Yi. It's not very pretty. It just works.
Yep.
And
And
it's
then,
it's a very practical style.
mm, and so when people, and it also seems like, not that obviously you can learn it super, quicker than other systems per se, but that since there is a simplification of technique, someone can really, take those foundational movements and kind of really grind out and hit heavy repetitions of those things. They're not learning long, intricate forms per se, especially in the foundational stuff. So that leads to some better practitioners usually.
Yeah, it is simpler to learn. And it is, like I said, the basics are done by repetitive movements of the basic techniques. And it has its weapons. I mean, we teach. Xing Yi sword, and it's like about 100 times simpler than that Wu style sword form. It's like,
So I get another big question I hear a lot of people, if it is such a harder style and it's very yang based, like how does it fit into the internal martial arts? We've talked about this in a couple episodes ago, but maybe for those who didn't hear when you first talked about this, when what is internal martial art and how Shingi fits into that.
well, internal and external are two different ways of developing power. External power development is basic athletic training, muscular contraction exercises for strength, aerobic exercises for stamina, repetitive hand-eye coordination drills to develop unconscious reflexive action for speed. Internal replaces that with mind intent, weight momentum, and a pumping of the bodily fluids for strength, relaxation, and diaphragmatic breathing for stamina. Whenever possible, speed is replaced with timing and positioning. What speed there is a byproduct of the relaxation, and there is no unconscious action. Everything is conscious action. Hard and soft are completely different aspects of your martial art. They're how you deal with power or force thrust against you. Soft, give before force and come back where there is no force against you. Hard, my force meets your force head on and overcomes it. And you can mix internal and external, hard and soft in any combination. Tai Chi is primarily internal and soft. And I think one of the reasons that everybody thought internal and soft were the same thing is because the first internal arts to come to the West were Tai Chi, and
Right,
the Japanese art of Aikido is
right.
also supposed to be done internally, and it's completely soft. So they thought internal was always soft, but no,
Mm,
Xing Yi is internally powered, but it's hard. My force meets your force head on and crushes it, but my force is developed internally. And then Bagua is noted for being internally powered and switching between hard and soft, sometimes in milliseconds and sometimes
mm,
in waves. But all the other styles, whenever you give before force, like when an eagle claw or tiger claw guy takes a punch that's coming this way and grabs it and pulls it the way it's going and tightens up all his muscles and yanks it with his muscular power, he's doing external power, but he's doing soft. He's doing force with force,
mm.
but he's doing external force with force. So he's doing external soft. You can mix hard and soft, internal and external in any combination. And Shingi is almost completely internally powered but hard.
Yeah. The same is true for me, and I feel like it's true for a lot of the students that you have at the Wudang PCA. But I have prior training with different systems, um, and so what are the habits with a student like me? What are the habits to break or to retrain someone who is used to doing more of the external kind of expressions? Is it harder to learn the internal? You know.
Well, the problem is that everything you've done developed unconscious reflexive action. That you do stuff automatically without thinking.
Mm,
And the internals are supposed to have no unconscious reflexive action. So that's one of the biggest things. To people, you learn a form and then you get it in muscle memory. Well,
right.
that's unconscious reflexive action. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to be thinking of each move as you do it, not before, not after, as you do it. But you're not doing stuff just reflexively without thinking about it at all. And that's usually the biggest problem is, and almost all sports are done externally. So we've all had external training.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest part's trying to get over this unconscious reflexive action.
Right. That makes
And
total
you
sense.
see, I run into students. You see it when we're training. When we're training in the yard, you see people go, "Oh, but I have this habit of doing this." And I say, "Well, if you have a habit, it means it's unconscious reflexive action, and you need to get rid of that anyway."
So do you think there's no room for that, or you think it's just it comes easier, so it's better if you're training your martial art to be training more of the conscious and the internal practice,
Well, there's the
because
difference
the
between the
unconscious stuff
two.
will come. Yeah.
If somebody's really, really, really good, they can turn it on and off.
Mm.
They can do unconscious with one thing and conscious with another thing. But for most of us, you got to keep it one or the other. And of course, you can do conscious action with anything the same way you can do unconscious action with anything. It's just a matter of whether you're going to be internal or external. The problem with the conscious action is when you do conscious action, you usually program in a series of moves.
Mm-hmm.
As you unconsciously go into that series of moves, you're not going to be able to change until that series of moves is over. Whereas if you're doing the same thing consciously and you're halfway through the series of moves and you realize it isn't working,
You
you can
can
change
change on a dime. Yeah,
right there. Yep.
that makes sense.
That's the big advantage of this stuff
Yeah.
is the ability to change without getting caught in a series of moves.
Right. Yeah, because there is some stuff that I've learned over the years that is effective, but then I'm like, why do I do it this way? You know, one, it's hard for me to teach it if I want to teach it because I just kind of learn the sequence of movements, you know, and so sometimes you can't separate them from one another, and that's hard to teach someone else. But then also too, you know, is there a more effective way to do this technique? I'm so rooted and stuck into this other thing, that it, you know, my brain can't think in that way, and so sometimes I have to force myself to unlearn those kind of habits, even if they're good habits, like you're saying. Even a good habit could lead into potentially being stuck in a position that you don't want to be. So the big question, and put you on the spot. So you have a Bagua book, you have a Tai Chi book. Why don't you have a Xing Yi book?
I just haven't gotten to it. Maybe someday. But I would say, in the
Yes.
meantime, the best Xing Yi book out there is that they reprinted Sun Ludang's 1915 Xing Yi Quan, The Study of Mind Form Boxing. And this is the
Awesome.
best book on Xing Yi that's available at the moment. Someday
Awesome.
I'll have mine out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We'll get that in the show notes. So a lot of good history in there. And are people able to find technique in there, or is it mostly just history?
This is a lot of technique.
Awesome.
There's, as a matter of fact, when we were, BP Chan didn't give us much lineage, and we had no idea exactly what we were learning. And then this book came out. I'm like, whoa, that's exactly what BP Chan's teaching us. Exactly what he's teaching us. But of course, like I said, Guoyuan Shen taught Sun Ludang, and Guoyuan Shen taught Wang Chang Chai, who eventually created Yi Quan. Chan's lineage, we have no idea how long, who's there, except that one of his teachers was named Chao Chang Hon, who nobody ever heard of. But it was from the Wang Chang Chai school. So, of course, they all go back to Guoyuan Shen. Whereas what we're doing from Liu Jingru is also Hubei Xingyi, but it's from the Li Suni school coming down from Haoguang. So you can see there are various minor differences, even though it's all Hubei Xingyi.
Awesome.
But yeah, this book is how we discovered that what we were doing was the same as what Sun Ludang did.
It's like when you do the one of those DNA tests. I know you're not a fan of it, but you're like, oh, I have this in my background from my spit. My spit told me.
Yeah, I did one. I did that.
Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um,
I specifically did it because there was this lifelong argument between my father and my uncle, where my father said that we had heavy Native American, and my uncle said no, we didn't. And my father was an early integrationist. I
mm,
mean, he taught in an all-black college in 41 to 43. You know, he drove Shirley Chisholm to all of her speaking dates in Michigan and stuff like that. He was put together Haile Selassie's library at Haile Selassie University in Ethiopia and came home
oh wow.
connected to the Eritrean Liberation Front to go out and visit him in Michigan. And there'd be the Eritreans of Kalamazoo, all 6 or 7 of them sitting around his living room discussing stuff, and my father sitting there catching every third or fourth word in Amharic, and his family in the dining room going, "He's got the Africans here again." It's like, but so my
So who won
father
the
used to
argument?
say, well, my father used to say that my brother Burley just doesn't want to admit that we're not all white.
Right.
And Burley used to say, Fran just doesn't want to admit that we
We
are
are all
all
white.
white. Yeah, and my uncle was correct.
Yeah.
I got the DNA test to find out, and my uncle was correct. Yeah, yeah, we're pretty much Northern European.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of different Northern European, but Northern European.
Yeah. Well, at least there was that influence, that cultural, those different cultural influences on your dad.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, so I think that that rounds out our discussion on those our three the three main or the three well-known internal martial arts. But next week we're actually going to be going into um, the fighting for health system that you've been creating over the years. But obviously not getting too much into it because we're gonna have the whole episode going over it. But how does it connect to this discussion on the internal martial arts?
Well, it was in the late 70s that some buddies of mine and I decided that we needed more ways to spar. So you've heard me talk about how you can internalize anything. So we started looking for taking different sparring methods and internalizing them and then expanding it into different defense systems also and creating this little system with as much sparring in it as possible with everything done with internal power.
Awesome. And so we're going to be talking about that next week. So if you're interested to see how to do this, especially I feel like there is a lot of internal martial art practitioners who maybe are not getting enough sparring, and trying to figure out ways to get more sparring into their practice. So I think people will really enjoy next week's episode. But again, make sure that you're subscribing to us on YouTube, you're subscribing to us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else. I got the siren going on in the background, New York City style. But yeah, subscribe and drop those reviews. It helps us out greatly. Share the podcast with a friend, a family member. Let them know about what we're doing here. And also, too, if you have any things that are ideas that are being sparked by the conversations that we're having here, and maybe follow-up questions that you have for Frank, feel free to drop them in the comment sections of the videos or on the show notes on the site, and we'll try to answer those questions, and maybe those questions will even lead into some subject matter for future episodes. But as always, Frank, thanks so much. Great wealth of knowledge, and it's great to bring this history to people's ears, and we'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, take it easy.